Welcome back, friends, to the premier shitcoin ASMR podcast. Unintentional, but today we're going to talk about a few decentralized finance coins. We're going to look at SUSHI, and we'll close with ETH and BTC. There are a couple concepts I want to talk about today as we go through this. And foremost, I want to point out for some of the newer traders, something that took me a long time to really understand. And that's the idea that when you make a support or a resistance line, you're not marking an exact price. If we come to this support here, we're looking at the weekly. It's very tempting to stress out about this. If you're new, you want to come in close to this and you want to see exact numbers, right? You might look at this spot and say, well, this wick is below this line and this wick is above this line, but these bodies are exactly on it. So where is my support? The answer is really it doesn't matter. Supports are not exact numbers, even though this support tells us we're at exactly 70,402 sats. It's something you can really view as more of a range. If you're familiar with your quantum mechanics, when you draw support, you're really drawing some kind of like waveform, some kind of cloud is how I usually think about it. So when we draw our supports, we're not really drawing a line at 70,402 exactly. That's why you'll see me a lot of the time say around 70k or something like that when I talk about this sort of level. What we really might be considering our support would be this area that might stretch from maybe the bottom of these to the top of the EMA, somewhere around this level. Whenever we talk about support or resistance, we're talking about a zone. So try to remember that when you draw your lines, when you're setting stops, when you're setting limit buys. That's an important concept to understand, that a lot of people are going to look at something like this that's an exact number. And they're going to try to psych themselves out. Well, I want to put my buys at exactly this, and I want to put stink bids just slightly above this because other people are going to be playing that level. And to an extent, that makes some sense. But really, when you understand that these are just ranges, it takes a lot of stress out of trying to put an exact number, find an exact line. Something that a lot of people will look at. Yes, we know what magnet mode is. Thank you, TradingView. Look at something like this. So you have these three bodies right here, or three wicks rather, that touch this line perfectly. But then you follow that with nothing, right? These bodies cut through this wick, it cuts through. Well, this looks so beautiful. We want it to be something, right? So people will also sometimes stress out about, well, should I mark this? Or should I mark the bottom of this? That's pretty close to there. Should I try to get down to this tiny little wick bottom here and catch the exact bottom of both of these wicks? Where should my support be? And the real answer, of course, if you're considering this a zone, is it doesn't matter. But there's a concept that I want to mention called recency. Recency is a pretty simple idea. It just means that the most recent price action is the most legitimate. So even though we don't have a 3 touch here, generally you want like a third. This is obviously a very deep psychological level, right? 70k exactly. We have some kind of buy wall where it hit this and it shot up and then it hit it again and shot back up. So probably if I absolutely had to pick one to the Satoshi number to go to, it would be 70k. But the real answer is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you mark here or here. What's the real difference between them? It's 3%. So you're going to really like psych yourself out about 3%. No, just, if anything, mark them both and just say, support is here-ish. Here-ish is okay for support. You don't need exact numbers. So with that in mind, let's go forward and look at where our supports and resistances are going to be for these coins. First we have SOL. And of course, as we just pointed out, on the weekly we can mark something around here. Maybe you want to mark the bottom of this. You could consider this sort of zone to be a failed attempt by the bears to push down. But you could also consider something like this, the top of this area, to be a failed attempt by the bulls to push out. So, again, if you're considering recency, you might be thinking, where should I put this? The top of this doesn't quite line up, but it's kind of on this wick top. Don't stress it. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter that much. Throw it down where it's probably about. And that's good enough. So probably what I would say is the tops of these, and if you break above this, you can worry about marking something up here. But for now, we don't need to worry about that because we're not above it. For now, we can simply mark something like this as our support. And we can come up to the top up here and consider something around here to be our resistance. And that tells us all of the information we really need to know. It tells us that there was a failed breakout. It tells us that bulls tried to close above but couldn't quite get it done. It tells us before that bears tried to get a body close low and couldn't. What we've really got here, when we see these supports and resistances, is just a bit of a range. If you want to consider this a range, you wouldn't be wrong. So until we can break out of this area, we're not really going anywhere. This is the kind of range that we've seen a lot of sell pressure all the way down to the bottom. That makes it more likely to me that we might revisit that bottom again. The thing that's concerning to me is, even though we're very high on the RSI, which in this case I feel is good, we're well above the EMA, we're up toward the resistance and not down at support. All of these things are good. All of these things are kind of bullish. And if you look at the average price, it's pretty much this. It's still kind of going up. But what you should be scared of, if you're looking at SOL, is this becoming a distribution. If this were to become a distribution top, you might have some kind of rounding out and down. So what we'd be looking for as we go forward, as this EMA creeps up, if price action continues to be bullish, is that we stop spending time toward the bottom of this range. We want to start spending our time up here. If we do bounce around, we want to stay above this EMA and get pushed out of this range. And remember, this is the weekly, so we could be range bound for a good amount of time. We could be range bound most of July and then break it down. So there's no rush to trade this, in my opinion. I don't see any reason to hold spot on this as long as it's in this zone. I don't see any reason to open a long, of course, at resistance after a breakout failed. That's usually a pretty bad sign. RSI is declining and we had a failed breakout. Twice you've got two failed breakouts. Not a great sign. Two failed breakouts and a lower low. You do have a higher high, but at this point, you got to be careful that you're forming some kind of triangle nonsense that could potentially break down. So I don't see any reason to trade this right now. If you just love SOL and you're going to hold it no matter what, then great. But if you're not in love with SOL, when this sort of like last ditch area, these two candles and the bottom of this, if this were to break it down, you'd be looking maybe maybe you could look here at the highest, around the top of this and, you know, the bottoms of these. But you don't really have support brick until around here. That's a long way down. You know, do you really want to risk 70% down for what? Say we do another breakout attempt and it fails. 70% down for 30% up. Not a great deal. I would much rather, even if we kind of come toward the bottom of this range, I would much rather long a support than try to short or to try and long at a resistance here. I'm not necessarily bearish on this, but I'm not necessarily bullish either. I think if you are looking at everything as a whole, it's really difficult not to be bullish on this. But with the market being the way it is, with Bitcoin being crazy, with Bitcoin dominance rising, with all the problems coming out of China right now, I think you have to be extra careful, even on something that looks good, even on something that has a bullish history, because this likes to make long runs. Sol just kind of picks a direction and goes for a long time. And if this decides to go down, I mean, look at this macro. You had, of course, a higher high, but then you actually had a lower low. And if this were to decide to be some kind of, even just to make like a higher low, could be, you know, very reasonable that it would go toward some kind of direction like that. I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's not a prediction or anything. I'm just saying it's not unreasonable. Given the market conditions being as fucky as they are, it's probably a good idea to abstain a little bit on setups like this. I think there are better setups out there that you can play, and this is not optimal if you're looking for a swing trade. If you're considering yourself a long-term investor or something, then great, go for it. But if you're looking for something that's going to make you profit this week, I think your bias has to be down. I mean, you have 2 failed breakouts and you're at resistance. So despite everything else, despite, you know, a nice consistent volume, trade volumes, like, okay, this volume profile is really like nothing. Despite being above the EMA, despite the RSI being in pretty bullish territory, you're at resistance after 2 failed breakouts, and that's that. Like, you've got to consider that. We're talking about recency, the most recent price action being the most legitimate. What's the most recent price action? 2 weeks of down. So don't fight the trend. If you want to zoom into the daily real quick, we'll just look at where we are. Maybe you can say, well, you have this hammer followed by like a nice green candle, but it's not engulfing, it's below the EMA, you know, it's coming up on the underside of the resistance, it's losing RSI, like the daily doesn't look very good. But just based on the weekly, this would be a big pass from me. Checking out DOT. Again, we want to favor more recent price action. It's very tempting to just, because your eyes kind of gravitate right towards something like this, don't they? And it looks pretty good. You have the bottoms of these, you catch some wicks, and then what's this though? Is this going to be anything? Was this anything? Not really. You have maybe this wick you could call. So you start to look around and say, does anything really fit here? And people tend to do exactly what I just did. They tend to go left to right, looking for something that lines up with new price action. But if you're favoring recency, what you really want to do is kind of go right to left instead. And you can see, just by holding your cursor where it is, if this lines up with anything on the left. What does it line up on? It lines up on the tops of these. That's pretty cool, right? But does it matter? What about all this? Doesn't mean anything here. Even though this is beautiful, you kind of catch the bottom of this wick, doesn't mean anything here. So you have to be kind of careful where you want to place these things. I think finding a resistance here is pretty simple. We can throw one about there. And again, understanding that supports and resistances are just zones. What about all the wicks? What about the candle tops? That's fine. You know, this is our resistance area around 76K. It doesn't have to be an exact number. The resistance is not 75,979. The resistance is somewhere around 76k. And if you start to think in those terms, you will be less stressed about buying specific levels, selling specific levels. So even, you know, you could just delete this and have like a block and consider this okay. That can be your resistance, somewhere up there. Somewhere is fine. As far as our support, I really think with this, we can kind of do the same thing. And you might see, like, where does this really land? And I think you end up with something maybe like this. And this seems like a big area at first. Maybe we can squeeze that a little tighter. So if you're looking at something like this, which actually both of them are red, so I don't know if you can even call that support at this point. You might have to go toward like the bottoms of these or something, like something like this that's catching the tops of these wicks and, you know, around the bottoms of these. So perhaps you would even want to put a support here if we continue to break down. But for now, just want to look at the block around where we are. You can see that this encompasses the full bodies of all of this. It catches a bounce here. It's retested on the top side as a support, and then it breaks down. Hello, soul. Welcome. That scared the shit out of me. Happy to have you here. You sadly joined slightly after we covered Soul, so your namesake unfortunately is all the way out of the way already. But to consider this a support block, I think is fine. And when you look at the price action here, let's change the colors just to be clear that we're talking about a support and a currently failing support and resistance. When you look at the price action here, something that I like to move on to doing down here, just throw our RSI, find our midpoint, which is just 50, and we can see that now we've moved below it, so it might be time for some bearish territory. As we talked about yesterday, if you spend most of your time in the top half of your RSI, it tends to be bullish. If you start spending most of your time in the bottom half of the RSI, it's probably going to be bearish. That doesn't mean I'm not like painting a price target, that's just as an example. But if you follow basically the trend of this price action, you get this big dump and then like a really weak bounce. So what we have right now, we're all the way back to these lows, which is not looking very good. For a while we had a range. We had this beautiful range right here. And we tried to break out of it. The breakout failed. It retested the resistance. And then it just shit itself all the way through support. So unless this bounces like right now very aggressively, what we need is to kind of come up and take this and not come back. I don't really think that's going to happen, considering that Sol also looks kind of weak. And the only support we have down here is from wicks, from these wicks, tops of these, bottoms, bottoms, bottoms. I think this is probably, you know, considering the local trend is down, follow the local trend, doesn't look great. Looking at SUSHI, I've already marked it just to save us a little bit of time since we talked about other two things already. Having already marked this, you can see on the weekly, it's also not looking good. So for our decentralized finance big boys here, Sol looks the best. I mean, if you had to go in one of these, it's hard to argue with this uptrend, right? But two failed breakouts and then dipping under resist all the way to support looks bad. It's not a trade I'd want to make. DOT, meanwhile, local trend down at best. If you want to make a bear case, you can argue sideways, but I mean, the local trend is down. And right now we are potentially losing support. If you want to YOLO long, this would be the place to do it, but I don't I don't feel like that's a good idea. We lost the EMA, we're losing support, we lost RSI. Bad vibes all around from that. On SUSHI, we kind of have the same situation. We've lost our RSI. And again, this is a good example. If you spend most of your time in the top half, it tends to be bullish. If you start spending all your time in the bottom half, probably looking pretty bearish. So right now, we're under this EMA. We're losing support. We've lost RSI. What is there to be bullish about? The local trend, looking basically just like something like this. You have essentially just two waves. And it looks pretty bad. So all across the board, DeFi not looking very good. I hate to say it, in this market, what I want most is to see something that I feel is bottoming and long it. Because there's been so much pain already, but it's not there. It's not there yet. So to wrap up, we'll take a look at ETH and Bitcoin quickly. ETH, yesterday we talked about what to expect. I said I was not expecting the support to be reclaimed, that I thought it would probably be retested and rejected, and that's what we're seeing right now. These purple lines are the weekly. So again, you see a wick all the way down to the weekly. After being rejected off of the weekly resistance, we see a wick to weekly support. Daily resistance did not hold. Daily support probably in the process of failing right now. I still think it's not unreasonable if we have some kind of bounce to kind of continue this trend, but I don't expect it to just rocket past weekly and go to the moon on like a crazy inverse head and shoulders. Right now, as I said before, trend is your friend until it ends. No sign it's going to end right now. And this is another prime case. Most of your time is being spent in the bottom. You're bearish. Most of your time is being spent in the top. You're bullish. Very easy RSI read when you just consider that. It doesn't matter, oh, it's 35 and below is this, and if you're at 70, it doesn't matter. Just, are you on the bottom or the top? That's really all you need to look at right now. RSI is bad. Under the EMA, under the weekly support, under, well, kind of under the daily. We're losing the daily right now. Our best hope is this weekly. I don't think it's going to happen. I still think sooner or later we get to the 1400. I mean, maybe we range around and then go down. Maybe we go straight to it. Maybe we make a failed breakout and then down. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm not that level of wizard, but looks bad. That's the summary. It still looks bad. Nothing changed from yesterday to today, except that we put in another red candle. So nothing to be excited about there. Bitcoin, on the other hand, had a little bit of a fight. So this is something I talked about yesterday as well. Basically, we have 4 lower lows, and we've got 3 failed breakout attempts. 3 failed breakouts and 4 lower lows are not a good sign. And then we tried to take the daily. We tried to get above the daily resist and failed. And today we didn't even tap it. I think I talked a little bit about like it would be nice to see, if you're a bull, you kind of want to come up to this area, right? You want to come up to this. You need to take this and put in a higher low. And even taking the daily doesn't look great, but it doesn't look like we're going to do that unless bulls really step in. And at this point, if they do, I would be afraid that it would be another kind of failed attempt to break this daily resistance, because you have it tested so much, right? Here, I mean, it acted as support. Here, it was very weak, but it came as support. And then you have these wicks around it that are propping it up. And from there, you get all these buy orders that are on the order books filled. until there aren't any left and that level fails. There aren't any buy orders left. If people were buying here, their limit orders are gone. Those are gone. They're off the books now. They've all been filled. There's no more left. The only thing that's going to push us up from here is people market buying spot. So unless a lot of people step into Michael Saylor this shit and buy a lot of spot, you've got kind of a bouncing ball thing going on, but it's maybe falling off the cliff here. It's like rolling down the table. So talking about the trend, very simple. That's like our median trend. We are getting lower and lower average price, which is great if you're dollar cost averaging in, but if you're a bull and you're really looking for, like, you know, maybe you got lucky and you're in a long from down here, or even maybe way down here, this is where I'd be closing it, because there's no reason to believe at this point, with this acting as a support that failed, this wick showing us, you know, this daily support, this kind of retesting it. We're trying to take it now, but we're just not respecting it. Talking about recency and the most recent prices being the most important. These two candles that we have are not respecting this level at all. They're respecting the resistance, but they're not respecting the bottom of the support. So it's more likely that that is respected than that this is respected. So I tweeted, I don't know, a week or so ago, when everyone was crazy bullish about all this, that I was, you know, I was bearish until proven wrong, and so far there's nothing to change my mind. This, I think it looks absolutely horrible. Twitter has kind of come around the past couple days after like lots of bull posting and just cope and hopium all through here. Everyone was pretty good spirits, and, you know, especially like on this run up, everyone was really happy, and, you know, there are a lot of different ideas. Maybe we get a double bottom, maybe we get like Dalai Lama. We can see now there's no double bottom, there's no Dalai Lama, there's only a failing high time frame daily support, and our only buying interest is all the way down here on the weekly. We can see no one's interested in buying here. All the orders have been filled. I mean, there were tons of orders on the book for this daily support, and they're gone now. So without a bunch of spot buying, the next buying interest is going to be this weekly. And that's pretty significant chunk down. You're looking at maybe 15% down before you have limit orders on the books again. That could really give you a bounce. So my joke about crossing out the probable and just calling this accumulation bottom, for now it stands. There's nothing that exists on this chart that should really change your mind. Even if you want to consider this like broadening wedges tend to break down. So there's nothing. You really have to take this, in my opinion. I don't think taking this support is good enough. I think you need to like reclaim this sort of potential line here. And I think you need to like go well past it and confirm it. Put in a higher low, and from there, if you don't break resistance, it doesn't even matter. Even if you come up here and you just fail again, I think the morale is going to be so shit that it will just kind of die. So that's it, guys. I'm still looking at this weekly support. I think that's our best bet. You're holding out for a championship long. This crab zone, not going to be a crab zone much longer. This whole area will be like, I don't know, if we spend a lot of time down here and then move up, I think it would rather just long, I think it would rather just long once we reclaim this and ride that all the way up than, you know, wait for this and try to long something here going up. But that's it. Nothing too new. No hypothesis has changed. We're actually putting in like a potential little like hammer top right now, which would be abysmal. This would be absolutely abysmal if this ended up being like a wave top, but we'll see. If you go to the weekly, look at the high time frames, it's not any prettier. Sorry about all the text, but you can see on the weekly we've basically just gone sideways a little bit down. You could argue, if you want to go for the bodies, that we're just kind of straight sideways, but that's nothing to be bullish about, right? If you're going by the weekly, you've got 2 wicks to weekly support and like 3, 4, actually, like all of these have touched the resistance, the weekly resistance, and failed, where we have 2 wicks down to weekly support. So even if you want to go higher time frame, I'd say it almost looks even worse. Bearish until any reason not to be. That's it for tonight. Thank you for stopping by. And tonight, probably morning for anyone watching this. So that's it for this morning. Best of luck to you. Best wishes on your trades. I hope you do well, whatever you're taking, whatever trades. If you have any requests, feel free to post them. I will get a YouTube link to the cut of this later. If you want to put a request on now, you can DM me a request and I'll look at whatever you want me to. Don't really have an agenda for this. Just want to check out 2 or 3 things, and then maybe like Bitcoin, Ethereum on a daily and see what's going on there. So have a wonderful day. Good luck with your trades. It's Nika. I'll catch you next time.